guys, welcome back to another episode of Last Minute, the channel that helps you with your life sciences. Say that's the night before your exams and you're stressed out, or you're starting a new section and you're feeling a little intimidated. This channel is the painkillers to all your life science problems. So let's not ramble too much today. Let's just get into it. We are going to be doing evolution. We're going to be looking at the evidence of evolution, sources of variation, theories of Lamarck and Darwin, natural selection versus artificial selection, punctuated equilibrium and speciation, and what is reproductive isolation. So let's get into it. So what is the evidence of evolution? So we're going to be looking at things that prove that evolution occurs. And what is evolution? It's just the fact that all organisms that are living, including plants and also animals as well, they all have been around for billions of years and they have evolved during that entire time. So we're going to be looking at what proves all of that. What proves that evolution occurred? Okay, that we're not the only people that have just been here like 5 minutes ago. So first thing first is fossils. So fossils are the preserved remains or impressions or traces of organisms from the past. So it could be bones, shells, footprints, leaf prints that are found in sand, rocks, imprinted in rocks, or deep in sand or deep in the sea. Those things are all called fossils, and this is how fossils help us see that actually evolution occurred. So for example, they help us with timeline, chronological sequences. So fossils that are older, that are like of older organisms, they are deep into the soil, like they are in deeper layers of the rocks, and while newer ones, they are on the surface. So they show us the timeline of how organisms have changed in the years. They show us the kind of environments that they've also even lived in. And then there's transitional forms. Some fossils have features like how their bodily structures of their features, they allow us to see how elephants, for example, there's animals called mammoths. They look like elephants, but they're much more hairier. So seeing a fossil of the mammoth, they show us that, there's animals that used to look like they are elephants, but they had like horns, and they also were hairier, but we don't have those kinds of elephants now. So like they show us the transitional forms and what bodily features that used to exist before that don't exist anymore in some modern animals or organisms or species. It shows us extinction and emergence. For example, there's proof that dinosaurs existed before. We found bones, imprints, and all of those stuff, but they don't exist anymore. They have gone extinct. So that we know that there's proof through the fossils that some certain species existed before, but they no longer exist anymore. And some species, including dinosaurs, they show how certain animals or species that exist now basically like evolved or changed. They had those features of those old species, but now they just look different because of the environment is obviously different. So the emergence, like the gradual change and branching of evolution that occurred. And then other evidence of evolution is genetics. So looking at molecular evidence or relatedness. So genetics, what is genetics? So genetics is the study of hereditary and DNA, the molecule that carries the instruction of life. So looking at DNA similarities, how does genetics help us understand or see the evidence of evolution? Is looking at DNA similarities. We can see which species are closely related to each other through DNA. For example, humans and chimpanzees share 98 to 99% of their DNA, suggesting that they have a common ancestor. Like in years before, there is an organism that we have a common ancestor with, chimpanzees. Shared genes and proteins. Many species share homologous genes, meaning that they have the same gene with similar functions inherited from a common ancestor. So we could be different species, but we might have the same gene, but we're different. So that means we also have a common ancestor. And mutation and molecular clock. So over time, mutations accumulate in DNA at regular rates. So now with that's how scientists believe that's how the formation of new species occur through mutations and molecular clocks. And then the last evidence of evolution is culture, behavioral and social evolution in humans. So culture includes knowledge, skills, beliefs, technology, behaviors passed on socially rather than genetically. So, for example, tools and development. When we look back, we see that human tools literally have evolved from what tools that were used long time ago. For example, you'll see how bows and arrows and maybe stones were sharpened to look like blades and knives and all of those things. That shows this proof of evolution, that because at that time there was no technology, there was no industrialization of the world, so it shows that there was life long before, and through those tools, that's how we know that. Language and communication. The development of language is a major step in human evolution, allowing cooperation, teaching, and cultural transmission. We know through, again, fossils and other things, like when people go to caves, they can see drawings on caves that shows how that even though maybe there was not this type of verbal communication before or writing, but this shows that there was some sort of form of communication that there was before, and this is how it looks like, and this is how what we're doing now, this is where it comes from and how it grew from there. And then there's cultural inheritance. Unlike genetic, which occurs over generation, cultural evolution can happen rapidly. New behaviors, technology. So cultural inheritance, it's like, for example, we can look at how, before, every type of organisms, most were eating raw meat, but later on they realized we can use fire, we can make fire, and with that fire we can actually cook food, and then that's how that cultural inheritance occurred. Now that's something now that we do. We just cook. We cook certain foods, and with that, there were cultural foods and traditional foods that were developed through that development. So it's all those kinds of things. So those three things are evidence of evolution: fossils, genetics, and culture. Looking at what was done then and how it's similar to what is done now. Genetics, how you might look at for example, a chimpanzee. When you look at a chimpanzee and a human being, you wouldn't think they are related, but they're now knowing that, this is the type of DNA we share. That means there has to be an organism before us that we are derived from, both of us are derived from. And also looking at fossil fuels, looking at their structures, their placement in rocks and layers of sand, that this organism lived so long time ago and this is how it looked, and compared to what we see every day now. So that is very much evidence that yes, the life did evolve. And now we're going to be looking at sources of variation. How, for example, zebras all have different patterns of stripes, even though when you look at them they kind of look the same. In every organism, in every species, there is variation. And how does that variation come about? We know we've talked about crossing over during meiosis. You can watch my meiosis videos and you can learn more about how that occurs. But crossing over produces new combination of alleles on each chromosome. So there's new combinations lead to genetically unique gametes. For example, you might have siblings, but one of your siblings could have brown eyes, like brown hazel eyes, but your parents, none of your parents have brown hazel eyes. You or any of our other siblings don't have brown hazel eyes. That shows how, as much as your siblings and you came from the same parents, mom and dad, but you're all still genetically very, very different, which why there's certain little traits that are unique to that certain sibling that nobody else has. And that's through crossing over during meiosis 1. And also due to random arrangement of maternal and paternal chromosomes, independent assortment. Also, that is on my meiosis video, which I'll make sure I'll link on the description box. So each gamete receives a random mix of paternal and maternal chromosomes. So in humans with 23 pairs of chromosomes, there are about 8 million possible combinations from this process alone. So 8 million possibilities, imagine. So that just shows how, unless you guys are identical twins, your siblings and you are all different, and this happens in all species. And random fertilization, when males have billions of sperms, so any of that sperm can fertilize any egg. Even with women or females, they also might have one egg available at the moment to be fertilized, but that's from so many other eggs that were in her body that were randomly chosen to remain dormant while one continued to grow, and one was the one picked to be able to be fertilized. So that's also with just 2 combination of gametes, they can produce over 70 trillion possible zygotes. So that just shows it just is so random, and you never know which egg and which sperm is going to fertilize, and what combination of alleles, chromosomes are just coming together right now. Random mating in populations, it's all random, there's no control. Even with humans, if you just look at humans and how in terms of races, there's just random mating. That's the same thing with zebras, lions, and every other organism and every other species. There's just random mating, which also ensures that alleles are mixed freely in the population, and this prevents traits from being limited to a certain group and maintains genetic. That's why also when sperm donors are donating sperm, they are allowed to donate a certain amount in the same clinic, so that this person doesn't create a lot of half siblings in the same area, which could lead to those half siblings finding each other and not knowing that they're half siblings and end up getting married and having their own kids, which would be a huge problem. And also mutations are a source of variation. The DNA sequence changing all the time creates new alleles, which makes new versions of genes. So a mutation is when there's a permanent change in the DNA sequence. So now let's look at the theories of Lamarck and Darwin. So let's start with Lamarck's theory. So Lamarck's theory is inheritance of acquired characteristics. So Lamarck believed that an organism can change during their lifetime in response to the environment, and then they can pass these changes to their offspring. For example, the first key points of his theories is the use and disuse. So Lamarck believes that if a particular part of your body, if you use it more, it becomes stronger and more developed, and it will then, that trait will be passed on to your children. And if you don't use a particular part of your body, that part of your body will become weaker and it will disappear over time, and it will not be available for your offspring, so you cannot pass it on to your offspring. And this also goes into the inheritance of acquired traits. So these changes that happened, for example, that body part that you were using so much, now it's so much stronger, you will be able to pass it down to your offspring. The one that has disappeared and that became weaker, it's not passing on. So that's where his main points of his theories. And then Charles Darwin believed in natural selection, meaning that evolution happens through natural selection, where the individuals who already have these traits they are suited for that environment. So as a result of that, just by chance, they have the best trait for this environment, therefore they will survive and reproduce more successfully. And then those other individuals that don't have those traits will just get smaller in that group, because they are not able to reproduce and they're not surviving, nor are they able to reproduce successfully as much as those with better traits. So his key point is survival of the fittest. So individuals with favorable traits, like I said, will adapt more, survive, and be able to reproduce, passing on their trait that they already have. And then for descent with modification, so over many generations, if this particular group is the one that gets to survive more and reproduce more than the other, then obviously over time the favorable trait will be passed on to the next generation, and that trait will be much more common and popular in the new generations to come, to the point that the other trait might even disappear in the timeline. So let's put this into perspective. For example, you have giraffes. So let's say, like, long time ago, giraffes, for if it was Lamarck's theory, Lamarck is saying that all giraffes had short necks, right? But then, they had to eat leaves, and there was not a lot of leaves on the ground or the grass, so they were trying to reach onto the trees instead. And so because they continuously kept stretching their neck to reach for leaves in the tree, they're using their neck a lot, it became taller, stronger, and now they have this long neck. Because of that, their neck got stretched. So now when they're having babies, they're instantly just giving birth to babies that have long necks, because now they have acquired this trait of long neck, and now they're passing it on. And then when they give birth, they give birth to babies that already have long necks. But then Charles Darwin's theory is that there were giraffes that had long necks, because genetics, we're not all going to be the same. There will be mutations, there will be a lot of variation in a species. So some giraffes already had long necks, and some giraffes had short necks. So if they're in an environment where there's a lot of nice nutritious leaves on trees than anything on the grass, the giraffes with longer necks meant they got nourishment more, they were healthier, they were stronger. That means they would survive. Whereas giraffes with shorter necks would struggle because they're not getting enough nutrients, and so they are really not surviving. They're not getting much nourishment, and they're getting weaker, and they're not surviving. So the tall-necked giraffes, they are able to have babies, healthy babies as well, because of how strong they are, because of the nourishment that they've been getting. Their kids are able to continue to survive as well, because they are able to nourish themselves, because they have long necks that they got from their parents. Yet short-necked giraffes, their babies may not be surviving. If they are even able to have babies, they're weaker, they're not getting nourishment because they have short necks. So what will happen over time, the short-necked giraffe starts to disappear, and there's more of long-necked giraffes, or there's only long-necked giraffes now because of that natural selection. So it was proven that Lamarck's theory was not valid. It was inaccurate, understandably so, because he was the first one to even detect evolution and see that, there's some sort of change that happened with organisms. So obviously, because if you're the first one to do something, there's a lot of room to make mistakes, because you are figuring it out. Well, last when you come second, you already saw what the mistakes of the first person did, so you won't make those mistakes, and there's more evidence for you to work on. So that's why Charles was able to get all of this information and be able to articulate and see what actually is happening. So now let's talk about natural selection, and what's natural selection and what is artificial selection, what's the differences. So for natural selection, it's a process by which organisms with traits that are better suited to their environment survive and reproduce more successfully, passing those advantages traits to their offspring. So it's just saying that it's a process where if certain individuals have a trait, just because of genetics and just because of variation in genetics, they have a trait, they're born with a trait that makes them by chance suitable for this environment. And then there's other individuals that are not born with that. Those ones with a suitable trait will survive and reproduce more, passing on that suitable trait. So the key points of this, it is more driven by environmental pressures, climate, predators, food availability, favors traits that increase survival and reproduction, and occurs gradually over many generations, and it leads to adaptation to the environment. And then how is this compared to artificial selection? Artificial selection, also known as selective breeding, is when humans choose which organism to breed based on desirable traits to produce offspring with those traits. So this is driven by human preference or need for taste, size, appearance, or productivity. They often happen faster because humans deliberately select these traits and can lead to traits that may not help in survival in nature but are useful to humans. This is common in culture and domestic animals. For example, dog breeding. Lots of dogs are being mixed up together, and all of those and certain traits are being picked, and that's because those human beings are deciding that, and it's not for those dogs to survive better in the environment or anything. It's just that this make this dog look cuter, okay, then we need this trait more. Or let me look at it in agriculture. Cows. There are certain cows that we all know are specifically for leather, specifically for meat, and specifically for milk. And so there will be certain traits that are picked to allow that for artificial selection to occur. So they'll breed certain cows to have a certain trait. For example, if these cows make more milk, then we're going to breed these certain cows so that we can get the cows which have the trait of making much more beautiful, creamy milk. So it doesn't matter. They don't care about, is this trait going to help this cow survive the natural environment? No, it's more about, this is going to get us more milk, nice tasty milk, we're going to get nice juicy meat, we're going to get nice good leather for jackets, bags, or whatever we using leather for. So it's not environmental, it's more human driven, or the industrialization of the world. So now we're looking at punctuated equilibrium. So punctuated equilibrium is a model of evolution which suggests the species remain relatively unchanged for long periods, but evolutionary change happens in short, rapid bursts, often associated with speciation. So this was proposed by Stephen J. Cold and Niles Aldrich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly, excuse me for that. In 1972, evolution does not always happen slowly and steadily. Instead, species often experience long periods where there's no change, and then there's a short period of rapid change, often due to sudden environmental shifts or isolation of small populations. So this equilibrium is saying that for a long time a species stays the same, no changes. Like the giraffes probably were just all having short necks for years, and then one day the grass just started burning and it was no grass, and there was only leaves on trees. And then fortunately for the giraffes who just had these long necks for no reason, now have a use for those long necks. And so this is maybe there's something wrong with the weather that happened in that short, quick time, and then that resulted in so many short neck giraffes dying, not being able to reproduce because of this environmental change, and now the long necks are surviving and now they're able to pass that on. So this is what the punctuated equilibrium is trying to show. So when you look at this diagram, where there's a branch, it shows the time where there was that little short change in the environment or whatever, or some sort of isolation of the population, whatever change that occurred in the environment that resulted in the species changing. So those branches, they show the changes that happened. Then speciation. So speciation is the formation of a new species from an already existing population. So a species, what is a species? It's a group of organisms that can breed to reproduce fertile offspring. So for a group of organisms to be considered species, they need to be able to interbreed, meaning make babies. But not only make babies, but make babies that can also grow up to make their own babies, that will also be able to grow up and make their own babies. So organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. So speciation happens when populations become reproductively isolated and genetic differences accumulate until they can no longer interbreed. So speciation happens, or the formation of a new species from an already existing one, happens when those organisms in that species get isolated, which causes them not be able to reproduce, and maybe in that isolation they experience two completely different environments, causing them to change, undergo natural selection, that even when they are brought together, they no longer can actually reproduce or interbreed. So let's just look at some examples. There's something called allopatric speciation. So allopatric speciation occurs when populations are geographically separated by either a physical barrier, such as maybe a mountain forms, or a river, oceans, a desert, or distance. They got lost, separated while they were walking to find the nearest water bed. So how happens? So a population is split by a barrier. So let's say there was these groups of ducks. They were all, or frogs. They were all in this one little pond or lake. And then maybe a bridge was formed. And when that bridge was formed, like they put a little wall in between this lake. So now they got separated. So when they get separated, now they're experiencing completely different environments, and that cause natural selection happens, mutation happens, and over time they become genetically different. So then when they are now brought back together, they cannot mate. They cannot make a fertile offspring, because now they are genetically different. And then another type of speciation is sympatric speciation, which occurs where they are in the same geographical area, but there's no physical barrier. So what happened? It's actually reproductive isolation that happens in this population. So maybe there is chromosomal changes, like some of them start experiencing some sort of mutation, chromosomal changes, like a polyploid in plants, or behavioral differences. They start having different mating calls. Maybe one duck is born with some sort of problem with its larynx, so it starts calling in a different way, and so the other female ducks are not responding to this male duck because his voice is different and his mating call is different. Or ecological differences, using different food sources. They're in the same environment, but there's certain things that are happening within them to cause reproductive isolation. So over time they cannot interbreed, and the ones that maybe have the same problem would be able to interbreed and make offspring, and then it's like a new species now is formed. And then reproductive isolation. So reproductive isolation happens when two populations of the same species become unable to interbreed successfully, even if they live in the same area. So there's two different reproductive isolation. One that happens before mating, like pre-zygotic isolation. So this prevents mating or fertilizing from ever happening. It could be like how we talked about geographical isolation. There's a mountain or river. Temporal isolation, like breeding time is different, mating time, season, time of the day, they breed at a different time. Or behavior isolation, which like we talked about, mating calls are now different. And then there is the post-zygotic isolation, where now fertilization already happened, but now the offspring that has formed cannot either make a baby, or their zygote doesn't even survive at all. So the hybrid inviability, it's when the fertilized eggs may form but the zygote doesn't grow to be a baby, it just dies early. Or hybrid sterility, where you see when a mule and a horse and a donkey have a baby, and that's a mule cannot reproduce, so they have formed an infertile baby, so therefore the mule cannot reproduce. So we have come to the end of our video. I hope this was very clear to you. I hope I wasn't talking too fast and I was able to break down everything very easily for you guys. Thank you so much for watching up until this point. And if this video was helpful for you, make sure you like the video, share it with your classmates, and leave a comment down below. I love hearing from you guys. And also subscribe. It's for free, so you would know that more videos are coming, and hit that notification bell so that you can get a notification when those new videos are there. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful for you. Good luck with your studies, and God